June 30th, 1941. 0830 hours. United States Marine Corps Recruiting Office, Greenville, Texas. 17-year-old Audie Leon Murphy stood at attention in front of Staff Sergeant William Henderson's desk. Try and make himself look taller than his actual height of 5 feet 5 inches. Murphy wore his only good shirt, pressed but worn, with patches on the elbows where his sister Corinne had repaired the fabric. His shoes were polished but cracked. He had walked 3 miles from his boarding house to this recruiting office because he could not afford the bus fare. He needed to enlist. He needed the salary. And most importantly, he needed to escape a life that had offered him nothing but poverty, loss, and desperation. Henderson looked at the young man standing before him and saw immediately what the problem would be. The kid was underweight, severely underweight. Henderson had processed hundreds of recruits since war preparations began. He knew the regulations. Marine Corps minimum weight requirement, 120 pounds. This kid looked like he weighed maybe 110 pounds, soaking wet. Step on the scale, son. Murphy complied. The scale settled at 112 pounds. Henderson checked the height measurement, 5 feet 5 and 1/2 inches. Both measurements were below Marine Corps standards. Henderson had seen this situation before. Farm boys from rural Texas who wanted to serve but whose bodies had been shaped by Depression-era malnutrition and hard labor that burned more calories than they consumed. The regulations were clear. No exceptions. Son, you're underweight and under height requirements for the Marine Corps. I can't accept your application. Murphy's face remained expressionless, but Henderson noticed the kid's jaw tighten. This was a young man who had learned not to show disappointment because life had given him too much practice at absorbing bad news. Sir, I can gain weight. I can train. I'm strong. I've worked farms my whole life. I can do whatever Marines need me to do. Henderson believed him. The kid had the look of someone who had done hard physical labor. Thin, yes, but wiry and tough. But regulations were regulations, and Staff Sergeant William Henderson did not have the authority to waive minimum physical requirements. I'm sorry, son. That's the regulation. You're free to try again when you've gained some weight. Murphy left the recruiting office and walked directly to the United States Navy recruiting station 3 blocks away. He filled out the application. He provided the same falsified birth certificate that claimed he was 18 years old instead of 17. He stepped on the scale. 112 pounds. The Navy recruiter delivered the same verdict. Below minimum weight. Application denied. Murphy walked home to the summer heat of Greenville, Texas, population 4,000, where everyone knew that the Murphy family had nothing, that Audie's father had abandoned the family in 1940, that his mother had died in 1941, that Audie, at 16 years old, had become responsible for his 5 younger siblings, that he worked whatever jobs he could find, picking cotton, hauling hay, working as a mechanic's assistant, and sent every dollar he earned to support his brothers and sisters who were living with different relatives because no single family could afford to take all 6 Murphy children. Audie Leon Murphy had been born on June 20th, 1925, in Kingston, Texas, a farming community so small it did not appear on most maps. He was the 7th of 12 children born to Emmett Barry Murphy and Josie Bell Killian. The family were sharecroppers, the lowest economic tier of rural Texas during the Great Depression. They lived in poverty that most Americans in 1941 could not comprehend. The Murphy children wore clothes made from flour sacks. They went barefoot most of the year because shoes were too expensive. They ate whatever they could grow, hunt, or trap. Meat was rare. Hunger was constant. Audie's father was an abusive alcoholic who contributed almost nothing to the family's welfare. In 1940, when Audie was 15, Emmett Murphy abandoned the family entirely. He would never return. Audie's mother, Josie, tried to hold the family together, but she was overwhelmed. She was chronically ill, malnourished, exhausted from bearing 12 children and trying to feed them with almost no resources. On May 23, 1941, Josie Bell Murphy died. The cause of death was listed as endocarditis, but the reality was simpler. She had worked herself to death trying to keep her children alive. Audie Murphy, 16 years old, became the head of a family that had no home, no money, and no prospects. He found work wherever he could. He was skilled with firearms. He had been hunting since age 5 to supplement the family's food supply. He could shoot a squirrel through the head at 50 yards with his borrowed .22 rifle. He could track deer through dense brush. He understood how to move silently, how to observe without being seen, how to kill efficiently. These were survival skills for a boy who had grown up in rural poverty. They would become combat skills that would make him the most lethal infantry soldier in American military history. But in June 1941, 6 months before Pearl Harbor, Audie Murphy was just a skinny teenager who had been rejected by 2 military branches because he weighed 112 pounds and stood 5 feet 5 inches tall. He could not serve his country because his body bore the evidence of a childhood spent hungry. Murphy did not give up. Over the next 18 months, as the United States entered World War II and began mobilizing millions of men, Murphy tried repeatedly to enlist. He tried Marine Corps again. Rejected. He tried the Navy again. Rejected. He tried the Army Air Corps, hoping to become a pilot or a gunner. Rejected. Insufficient education and below weight requirements. Every rejection came with the same message. Gain weight, come back later. Murphy worked. He ate whatever extra food he could afford. He lifted weights improvised from farm equipment. He gained 5 pounds, then 10 pounds. By early 1942, he weighed 122 pounds. Still thin, but within minimum Army standards. On June 30th, 1942, exactly 1 year after his first rejection, Audie Murphy walked into a United States Army recruiting office in Greenville, Texas. The Army recruiter was Corporal James Trice, a World War I veteran who had been recalled to service to help process the flood of recruits entering the Army after Pearl Harbor. Trice looked at Murphy's application. Age listed as 18, Murphy was actually 17, but the falsified birth certificate claimed otherwise. Weight, 122 pounds. Height, 5 feet 5 and 1/2 inches. Both measurements were technically within Army minimum standards, though barely. Trice conducted the physical examination. Murphy's eyesight was excellent. His reflexes were quick. His coordination was outstanding. The kid looked fragile, but Trice had learned in World War I that appearance did not always correlate with combat effectiveness. Some of the toughest soldiers Trice had served would have been small, wiry men who could march all day carrying full packs and still have energy to fight when they reached the objective. Son, why do you want to join the Army? Murphy's answer was simple and honest. I need the money to support my family, and I want to serve my country. Trice approved the application. On June 30th, 1942, Audie Leon Murphy was inducted into the United States Army. His serial number was 18,083,707. His military occupational specialty, rifleman. His base pay, $50 per month, of which he would send $40 to his siblings. He was assigned to the 15th Infantry Regiment, 3rd Infantry Division. He would report to Camp Wolters, Texas, for basic training. Murphy's first few weeks in the Army were difficult. He weighed less than most of his fellow recruits. He struggled with some of the physical training requirements. Long marches with full pack left him exhausted. But he was determined, and he had one advantage that most recruits lacked. He knew how to shoot. The Army in 1942 used the M1 Garand rifle as its standard infantry weapon. The M1 was a semi-automatic rifle that fired .30-06 ammunition from an 8-round clip. It was accurate, reliable, and significantly more advanced than the bolt-action rifles used by most other armies. But it required skill to shoot well, especially at ranges beyond 200 yards. During rifle qualification, Murphy demonstrated marksmanship that surprised his instructors. At 100 yards, he could put all 8 rounds into a target the size of a dinner plate. At 300 yards, he could still hit man-sized targets consistently. His shooting style was instinctive and fast. He did not use the traditional marksmanship techniques taught in basic training. He simply raised a rifle, acquired a target, and fired. And he hit every time. Sergeant Joseph Simons, Murphy's platoon sergeant during basic training, later recalled, Murphy was the best natural shot I ever saw. He didn't aim like other soldiers. He just looked at the target and fired, and the bullet went where he wanted it to go. It was like the rifle was part of his body. That natural shooting ability came from necessity. Murphy had been hunting for food since age 5. He had learned to shoot because if he missed, his family went hungry. He had developed a kind of marksmanship that comes only from thousands of hours of practice under conditions where every shot matters. The Army would refine that skill, but the foundation had been built in the forests and fields of rural Texas by a boy who could not afford to waste ammunition. Murphy completed basic training. In August 1942, he was promoted to private first class. He was assigned to Company B, 1st Battalion, 15th Infantry Regiment, 3rd Infantry Division. The 3rd Infantry Division, nicknamed the Rock of the Marne for its defensive stand in World War I, was one of the Army's most experienced units. It would see combat in North Africa, Sicily, Italy, France, and Germany. It would suffer some of the highest casualty rates of any American division in World War II. And Audie Murphy would serve in it from his first day of combat until the war ended. In March 1943, Murphy and the 15th Infantry Regiment boarded transport ships in Norfolk, Virginia, bound for North Africa. The United States had entered the North African Campaign in November 1942 with Operation Torch. By March 1943, Allied forces were pushing German and Italian forces toward Tunisia. The 3rd Infantry Division would join that offensive, conducting its first combat operations against experienced Afrika Korps troops. Murphy was 18 years old. He weighed 125 pounds. He stood 5 feet 5 inches tall. He had never been in combat. He had never killed anyone. He did not know if he would be brave under fire or if he would freeze. He did not know if his marksmanship skills would translate to combat conditions where targets shot back. He was about to find out. March 1943 through September 1944. North Africa, Sicily, Italy, France. The 3rd Infantry Division arrived in North Africa in late March 1943 and immediately moved into combat positions in Tunisia. For Audie Murphy, the first exposure to warfare was not a dramatic firefight, but rather the grinding, exhausting reality of infantry combat. Long marches carrying 60-pound packs, digging foxholes in rocky soil, standing watch in cold desert nights, eating cold rations, and waiting for orders. The 15th Infantry's first major engagement occurred in early April 1943 near El Guettar, Tunisia. German forces were conducting a fighting withdrawal toward the coast, and American units were pursuing them. Murphy's company was ordered to assault a hill held by German infantry, supported by machine guns and mortars. Private First Class Audie Murphy experienced combat for the first time on April 7, 1943. His company advanced across open ground toward German positions on elevated terrain. German machine guns opened fire. The sound was unlike anything Murphy had experienced, a continuous ripping noise that he later described as sounding like fabric being torn. Men around him fell. Some were killed instantly. Others screamed for medics. Murphy hit the ground and crawled forward, using whatever cover he could find. The training took over. Murphy identified a German machine gun position approximately 200 yards ahead. He saw the muzzle flash. He estimated the range. He aimed his M1 Garand and fired 8 rounds in rapid succession. The machine gun stopped firing. Murphy reloaded and moved forward. He did not know if he had hit anyone. He did not stop to think about it. He focused on the next threat, the next target, the next few yards of ground. The assault succeeded. Murphy's company captured the hill. German forces withdrew. That night, Murphy learned that he had killed 2 German soldiers during the attack. They were the first human beings Audie Murphy had ever killed. He was 18 years old. He wrote a letter to his sister Corinne, but did not mention the killing. He wrote about the weather, about missing Texas, about hoping the war would end soon. He did not write about what it felt like to shoot another human being, because he did not know how to explain it. Over the next 16 months, Audie Murphy would become one of the most effective killers in the United States Army. Not because he was cruel or because he enjoyed violence, but because he was skilled, disciplined, and utterly fearless in combat. The combination of natural marksmanship, quick reflexes, and a strange calmness under fire made him extraordinarily dangerous to enemy soldiers. The North African Campaign ended in May 1943 with the surrender of German and Italian forces in Tunisia. The 3rd Infantry Division prepared for the invasion of Sicily. On July 10, 1943, Murphy participated in the Allied landings on Sicily's southern coast. The invasion encountered stiff resistance from Italian and German defenders. Murphy's unit fought through coastal defenses, pushed inland, and engaged in brutal combat through Sicilian hills and towns. During the Sicily campaign, Murphy's reputation as a marksman spread through his battalion. Officers began assigning him to positions where accurate rifle fire was critical. He was often placed as point man during patrols because his ability to spot and engage enemy soldiers before they could fire gave his unit a critical advantage. He was given sniper duties during defensive operations, positioned where he could cover approaches and engage targets at long range. Second Lieutenant James Rowan, Murphy's platoon leader in Sicily, later described Murphy's combat effectiveness. Murphy had a gift for reading terrain and anticipating where enemy soldiers would appear. He seemed to know instinctively where to look, where to aim, when to fire. In one engagement, he killed 7 German soldiers in less than 2 minutes, all at ranges over 300 yards. I had never seen anything like it. But Murphy was not just a marksman. He demonstrated leadership qualities that his superiors noticed. He remained calm under fire when other soldiers panicked. He made tactical decisions quickly and correctly. He volunteered for dangerous missions. He looked after younger soldiers in his squad, teaching them survival techniques and combat skills. By September 1943, when the 3rd Infantry Division invaded mainland Italy at Salerno, Murphy had been promoted to corporal. The Italian campaign was brutal. German forces conducted a skilled defensive withdrawal up the Italian peninsula, contesting every river crossing, every mountain pass, every town. American casualties were heavy. The 15th Infantry Regiment lost hundreds of men to combat, disease, and exhaustion. Murphy survived engagement after engagement, earning a reputation as someone who could not be killed. On January 22, 1944, the Allies launched Operation Shingle, the Anzio landings. The 3rd Infantry Division was part of the assault force that landed on the beaches south of Rome. The operation was intended to outflank German defensive lines and force a German withdrawal from southern Italy. Instead, German forces contained the beachhead, and Allied troops were pinned down in brutal fighting for 4 months. Murphy's combat performance at Anzio elevated him from a skilled rifleman to a recognized combat leader. On one occasion, his platoon was pinned down by German machine gun fire during an attack on a farmhouse. Murphy crawled forward alone, worked his way to a position with line of sight on the German position, and killed the machine gun crew with rifle fire. His platoon advanced and captured the objective. On another occasion, Murphy's squad was ambushed by German soldiers using a destroyed tank as cover. Murphy maneuvered to flank the position, killed 4 German soldiers with rifle fire, and forced the others to surrender. His actions saved his squad from being overrun and likely destroyed. The combat recommendations began accumulating. Bronze Star for Valor in Sicily. Bronze Star Oak Leaf Cluster for Valor at Salerno. Silver Star for Gallantry at Anzio. Murphy was promoted to sergeant in February 1944. He was 20 years old. He had been in combat for 11 months. He had killed at least 40 enemy soldiers in verified engagements, and likely many more in combat where exact counts were impossible. In May 1944, Allied forces finally broke out of the Anzio beachhead. Rome fell on June 4th. 2 days later, the Allies landed in Normandy, opening the Second Front in Western Europe. The 3rd Infantry Division was withdrawn from Italy and sent to prepare for Operation Dragoon, the invasion of southern France. On August 15, 1944, the 3rd Infantry Division landed on the Mediterranean coast of France near Saint-Tropez. The operation encountered lighter resistance than Normandy. German forces in southern France were outnumbered and outgunned. American units pushed rapidly inland, racing up the Rhone Valley toward the German border. During the southern France campaign, Murphy's leadership responsibilities increased. He was promoted to staff sergeant in August 1944. By September, he was acting platoon sergeant, responsible for 40 men in combat operations. He led patrols, planned ambushes, coordinated with armor and artillery support. He continued to demonstrate extraordinary courage and tactical competence. On September 15, 1944, near the town of Lameth, France, Murphy's platoon was advancing through a forest when German forces ambushed them with machine gun and mortar fire. The platoon took cover, pinned down and unable to maneuver. Murphy assessed the situation, identified the German positions, and made a decision that would earn him his first Distinguished Service Cross. Murphy ordered his platoon to provide covering fire. Then he advanced alone, directly toward the German positions. He moved from tree to tree, using terrain and cover, getting close enough to throw grenades into the German foxholes. He killed or wounded at least 8 German soldiers and forced the remainder to withdraw. His platoon advanced, suffering 0 casualties during the action. The attack that should pin down Murphy's platoon for hours was resolved in 15 minutes through one soldier's aggressive action. Murphy's company commander, Captain Harold Price, recommended Murphy for the Medal of Honor for the Lameth action. The recommendation was downgraded to the Distinguished Service Cross, the second highest award for valor, because there were no officer witnesses to the entire action. Murphy received the decoration in October 1944. He was 19 years old. He had been in combat for 18 months. He had killed over 80 enemy soldiers, and his most famous action was still 4 months away. January 26, 1945, 1,400 hours. Holtzwihr, France. Second Lieutenant Audie Leon Murphy stood in a frozen field 2 kilometers south of Holtzwihr, watching German infantry and armor emerge from the Colmar pocket. Murphy was 20 years old. He weighed 135 pounds. He commanded Company B, 1st Battalion, 15th Infantry Regiment. His company had been reduced from 190 men to 19 combat-effective soldiers after weeks of brutal winter fighting in the Vosges Mountains and the Alsace region. Those 19 men were positioned in a defensive line along the edge of a forest, overlooking open fields that stretched toward German positions. The tactical situation was simple and desperate. German forces were attempting to break out of the Colmar pocket, a salient in Allied lines where German troops were surrounded on three sides. The Germans needed to punch through American defensive positions to escape encirclement. They had committed significant forces to the breakout: 6 Panzer tanks, approximately 250 infantry soldiers, and artillery support. Murphy's 19 men and 2 M10 tank destroyers were the only American forces positioned to stop them. The German attack began at approximately 1,400 hours. Artillery fire struck Murphy's positions. The 2 M10 tank destroyers moved forward to engage the German armor. Murphy ordered his infantry to hold their positions in the tree line and wait for the Germans to come within rifle range. Then one of the M10 tank destroyers was hit by German tank fire. The crew bailed out and retreated toward American lines. The 2nd M10, positioned approximately 50 meters in front of Murphy's infantry line, continued firing at the German tanks. Murphy watched the battle develop and recognized immediately that his position was untenable. 250 German infantry were advancing across the open field. 6 German tanks were providing fire support. Murphy had 19 riflemen, 1 M10 tank destroyer, and no artillery support available because the radio had been destroyed by German artillery fire. The logical decision was to withdraw before German forces overran the position. Murphy made a different decision. He ordered his men to hold their positions. Then he ran forward across 50 meters of open ground under German machine gun fire to the disabled M10 tank destroyer. The vehicle was burning, hit by German tank fire, fire spreading through the engine compartment. The crew had abandoned it. Murphy climbed onto the vehicle and took control of the .50 caliber M2 Browning heavy machine gun mounted on the turret. The M2 Browning was one of the most effective weapons in the American arsenal. It fired .50 caliber armor-piercing and incendiary rounds at a cyclic rate of approximately 550 rounds per minute. The ammunition was fed from a 200-round belt. The weapon had an effective range of 1,800 meters. In the hands of a skilled operator, the M2 could destroy light armor, kill infantry at extreme ranges, and provide devastating suppressive fire. Audie Murphy was an extraordinarily skilled operator. He had trained on the M2 during his time as a platoon sergeant and company commander. He understood the weapon's ballistics, its recoil characteristics, its ammunition requirements. And he was standing on a burning tank destroyer, completely exposed to enemy fire, about to use that weapon against 250 German soldiers and 6 tanks advancing across open ground. Murphy opened fire at approximately 1,415 hours. His first burst hit a German infantry squad at 400 meters. Several soldiers fell. The Germans took cover and began returning fire. Murphy traversed the gun and fired again. Another burst. More German soldiers down. The Germans advanced in short rushes, using whatever cover they could find in the frozen field. Murphy continued firing short, control bursts aimed at visible targets, longer bursts for suppressive fire when Germans tried to advance. The German infantry called for tank support. 2 Panzer IV tanks moved forward to provide covering fire for the infantry advance. The tanks fired their 75mm main guns at Murphy's position. The rounds impacted near the M10, but did not score direct hits. Murphy ignored the tanks and continued engaging the infantry. He understood that the tanks were trying to suppress him, so the infantry could close the distance. If he stopped firing, the German infantry would overrun his position and his 19 men in the tree line. Murphy fired continuously for approximately 20 minutes. He went through multiple ammunition belts. His hands were burned from handling the hot weapon. The M10 beneath him was burning more intensely, fuel leaking from ruptured tanks, flames spreading through the crew compartment. The vehicle could explode at any moment. German machine gun fire hit the M10 repeatedly, rounds sparking off the armor. Murphy continued firing. At approximately 1,435 hours, a German machine gun round struck Murphy's right leg, penetrating his calf muscle and exiting without hitting bone. Blood soaked his boot. The pain was immediate and intense. Murphy kept firing. He shifted his weight to his left leg, braced himself against the turret for stability, and continued engaging German targets. Later, he He would describe the wound as not that bad because it did not prevent him from operating the weapon. The German advance stalled. Murphy's continuous fire forced the infantry to take cover. Every time German soldiers attempted to advance, Murphy engaged them with a .50 caliber, killing or wounding multiple soldiers. The Germans could not advance across the open ground while Murphy was firing. They could not flank him because the terrain channeled their approach. They tried to suppress him with concentrated machine gun fire, but Murphy was partially protected by the M10's turret armor and kept firing despite the rounds impacting around him. At approximately 1,445 hours, Murphy's company radio operator, positioned in the tree line, managed to establish contact with artillery support. Murphy used a radio to call and fire missions on German positions. While continuing to fire the .50 caliber machine gun, Murphy directed artillery fire onto concentrations of German infantry and armor. The combination of Murphy's direct fire and indirect artillery fire devastated the German attack. By 1500 hours, the German assault had been broken. Approximately 50 German soldiers had been killed or wounded by Murphy's fire. Many more had been killed or wounded by the artillery fire Murphy directed. The German armor withdrew. The surviving German infantry pulled back to their starting positions. The attack, which should have overrun Murphy's undermanned position, had failed completely. Murphy climbed down from a burning M10 tank destroyer and walked back to his company's positions in the tree line. He was bleeding from his leg wound. His hands were burned. He was covered in soot and blood. His 19 men were still in position, still combat effective, having suffered 0 casualties during the action. Murphy refused medical evacuation until he confirmed that his company's defensive line was secure and that German forces were not preparing a second attack. When medics finally evacuated Murphy to an aid station, doctors found that the wound in his leg was serious but not critical. The bullet had passed through muscle without hitting major blood vessels or bone. Murphy would require several weeks of recovery before returning to combat duty. But the physical wound was minor compared to the psychological impact of what Murphy had just done. Second Lieutenant Audie Murphy had stood alone on a burning vehicle for approximately 50 minutes, engaging an enemy force that outnumbered him approximately 13-1. He had killed or wounded at least 50 enemy soldiers. He had directed artillery fire that killed dozens more. He had prevented a German breakthrough that would have destroyed his company and created a gap in American defensive lines. He had done this while wounded, while the vehicle beneath him was burning and could have exploded at any moment, and while under continuous enemy fire from rifles, machine guns, and tanks. The action at Holtzwihr was witnessed by multiple American soldiers. Murphy's battalion commander, Lieutenant Colonel Keith Ware, personally investigated the engagement and interviewed witnesses. Company B's radio operator provided detailed testimony about Murphy's actions and the artillery fire missions Murphy directed. Soldiers in the defensive line described watching Murphy stand on the burning tank destroyer for nearly an hour, firing continuously at German forces. On June 2, 1945, Audie Murphy received the Medal of Honor, the United States' highest military decoration, for his actions at Holtzwihr. The citation described his indomitable courage and his refusal to give an inch of ground that saved his company from possible encirclement and destruction. Murphy was the first person in the 3rd Infantry Division to receive the Medal of Honor during World War II. He would be one of only 464 recipients of the award during the entire war. But the Medal of Honor was just one of 33 awards and decorations Murphy would receive for his combat service. By the time the war ended in May 1945, Murphy had earned every Combat Valor award given by the United States Army, including the Medal of Honor, Distinguished Service Cross, 2 Silver Stars, Legion of Merit, and 3 Purple Hearts. He had also received decorations from France and Belgium for combat actions in those countries. Murphy's kill count, the number of enemy soldiers he personally killed during combat, is disputed and probably unknowable with precision. Official estimates range from 240 to over 300. Murphy himself never provided a specific number, saying only that he had killed a lot of Germans and that he did not keep count. What is certain is that Audie Murphy was one of the most lethal infantry soldiers in American military history. May 1945 through May 1971. The cost of survival. Audie Murphy returned to the United States in June 1945 as the most decorated soldier in American military history. He was 20 years old. He had spent 27 months in combat across 5 countries. He had been wounded 3 times. He had killed hundreds of enemy soldiers. He was a national hero, celebrated in newspapers and newsreels. Life magazine featured him on its cover in July 1945 with the headline, Most Decorated Soldier. He received parade invitations, speaking requests, and offers from Hollywood. But Murphy came home with invisible wounds that would never heal. He suffered from what doctors in 1945 called battle fatigue or shell shock, what modern medicine recognizes as post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. He experienced severe insomnia, sleeping no more than 2 or 3 hours per night. He had violent nightmares that replayed combat experiences with vivid intensity. He kept a loaded .45 caliber pistol under his pillow and sometimes woke up in defensive positions, confused about where he was and believing he was still in combat. Murphy struggled with what today would be diagnosed as survivor's guilt. He had watched hundreds of soldiers die during the war, friends, subordinates, fellow infantrymen whose deaths he could not prevent. The question haunted him. Why did he survive when so many others did not? He had no answer. The randomness of survival in combat, the bullet that missed him by inches, the artillery shell that killed the soldier next to him, created a psychological burden that Murphy carried for the rest of his life. In interviews years later, Murphy described his mental state after the war. I was having nightmares all the time. I couldn't sleep. I was drinking too much. I was angry all the time without knowing why. I had killed so many people during the war, and I didn't feel anything about it at the time because that was my job. But after the war, when I wasn't in combat anymore, all those deaths caught up with me. I started thinking about the German soldiers I had killed. They had families. They had people who loved them, and I had taken them away. I know it was war. I know I was doing my duty. But that knowledge didn't make it easier to live with. Murphy moved to Hollywood in 1946, hoping that a career in films would give him purpose and help him readjust to civilian life. Actor James Cagney saw Murphy's photograph in Life magazine and arranged a screen test. Murphy had no acting experience, but he had a natural presence on camera, and his war record gave him instant credibility for military roles. He signed a contract with Universal Pictures and began appearing in films. Between 1948 and 1969, Murphy appeared in 44 films, mostly westerns and war movies. His most significant role was playing himself in The Hell and Back, 1955, based on his autobiography of the same title. The film was a commercial success and introduced Murphy's story to millions of Americans who had not followed his wartime exploits. Murphy's acting was competent but not exceptional. What made his performances compelling was the authenticity he brought to military roles, an authenticity that came from actually having experienced what he was portraying. But Hollywood success did not resolve Murphy's psychological struggles. He became addicted to sleeping pills, taking them every night to manage his insomnia and nightmares. In 1951, he locked himself in a hotel room for a week to break the addiction through forced withdrawal. He succeeded in ending his dependence on sleeping pills, but the underlying sleep disorders remained. For the rest of his life, Murphy rarely slept more than a few hours per night. Murphy's personal relationships were complicated by his PTSD. He married actress Wanda Hendricks in 1949. The marriage lasted less than 2 years, ending in divorce in 1951. Murphy later married Pamela Archer in 1951, and that marriage lasted until his death. They had 2 sons. But Murphy's family life was difficult. His nightmares, insomnia, and occasional violent outbursts created stress that his wife and children had to navigate. Murphy was a loving father when he was psychologically stable, but his mental health struggles made family life unpredictable. Despite his personal struggles, Murphy became an advocate for veterans suffering from combat-related psychological trauma. In the 1960s, Murphy began speaking publicly about his own PTSD symptoms and calling for better treatment for veterans. This was revolutionary for the time. In the 1950s and 1960s, mental health issues were stigmatized, and combat-related psychological trauma was often dismissed as weakness or malingering. Murphy's willingness to discuss his struggles publicly helped legitimize PTSD as a real medical condition requiring treatment. Murphy testified before Congress in the late 1960s, advocating for increased funding for veterans' mental health services. He argued that soldiers who had served their country in combat deserved medical treatment for psychological wounds, just as they received treatment for physical wounds. His testimony contributed to policy changes that eventually led to better recognition and treatment of PTSD in veterans. Murphy's advocacy work was motivated by personal experience and by the recognition that many veterans were suffering in silence. Murphy estimated that he knew dozens of World War II veterans who had committed suicide after returning home because they could not cope with combat-related psychological trauma and received no effective treatment. He wanted to prevent future generations of veterans from experiencing the same neglect. Financially, Murphy's post-war life was unstable. His film career earned him substantial income during the 1950s, but his spending often exceeded his earnings. He invested in various business ventures, including horse breeding and oil exploration, with mixed results. By the late 1960s, Murphy faced financial difficulties serious enough that he considered bankruptcy. He continued acting in lower-budget films to maintain income, even though his interest in acting had diminished. On May 28, 1971, Audie Murphy was killed in a plane crash near Roanoke, Virginia. He was 45 years old. Murphy had been traveling on business, flying a private aircraft from Atlanta to Martinsville, Virginia. The plane encountered bad weather and crashed into Brush Mountain near Catawba, Virginia. All 6 people on board were killed. Murphy's body was found in the wreckage, identified through fingerprints and dental records. The news of Murphy's death shocked the nation. Tributes poured in from veterans organizations, military leaders, Hollywood figures, and ordinary citizens who remembered Murphy as a symbol of American courage and sacrifice. Murphy was buried at Arlington National Cemetery on June 7, 1971, with full military honors. His funeral was attended by hundreds of veterans and dignitaries. The gravesite became one of the most visited locations in Arlington, second only to President John F. Kennedy's grave. Murphy's legacy is complex and multifaceted. He was the most decorated American soldier of World War II, a combat leader of extraordinary courage and effectiveness. He was also a man who struggled for 26 years after the war with psychological trauma that he could never fully overcome. His willingness to speak publicly about his PTSD helped change how America understood and treated combat-related psychological injuries. His advocacy contributed to policy changes that benefited countless veterans. The military decorations Murphy received during his 3 years of service tell part of his story. Medal of Honor, Distinguished Service Cross, 2 Silver Stars, Legion of Merit, Bronze Star with Valor Device, an Oak Leaf Cluster, 3 Purple Hearts, and 24 other awards and decorations from the United States and foreign governments. These were the official recognition of Murphy's combat performance, the actions that could be witnessed, documented, and verified. But the unofficial legacy is equally significant. Murphy demonstrated that physical size and appearance have little correlation with combat effectiveness. He proved that a soldier weighing 135 pounds and standing 5 feet 5 inches tall could be more lethal and more effective than soldiers twice his size. He showed that marksmanship, tactical intelligence, and courage under fire matter more than physical imposing presence. Murphy's tactical innovations influenced infantry doctrine. His use of aggressive frontal attacks to break enemy positions, his skill at calling indirect fire while under direct fire, and his ability to lead by example rather than by authority became case studies taught at military schools. Senior officers studied Murphy's actions at Holtzwihr as an example of how a single soldier with the right skills and mindset could change the outcome of an engagement. But perhaps Murphy's most important legacy was his post-war advocacy for veterans' mental health. By speaking openly about his own PTSD symptoms at a time when such discussions were culturally taboo, Murphy helped legitimize combat-related psychological trauma as a real medical condition requiring treatment. His testimony before Congress contributed to policy changes that improved mental health services for veterans. His willingness to be vulnerable about his struggles gave other veterans permission to seek help. In his autobiography, To Hell and Back, published in 1949, Murphy wrote, "I had gone to war with a boy's wild notion that war was glory and honor and adventure. I came home knowing war was horror and waste and death. I saw good men die and bad men survive. I killed enemy soldiers because that was my job, and they would have killed me if I hadn't killed them first. I don't regret what I did during the war, because I was doing my duty, but I wish the war had never happened. I wish all those soldiers, American, German, Italian, French, could have lived their lives instead of dying in combat, and I wish I could forget the things I saw and did during those 3 years." Murphy never forgot. The war defined the rest of his life. The nightmares continued. The insomnia persisted. The survivor's guilt never resolved. In the final interview Murphy gave before his death in 1971, a journalist asked him if he considered himself a hero. Murphy's response was characteristically humble. "I'm not a hero. I'm just a soldier who did his job. The real heroes are the men who didn't come home. They gave everything. I just survived." Audie Leon Murphy survived 3 years of continuous combat, earned 33 military decorations, killed hundreds of enemy soldiers, and became the most famous American soldier of World War II. But he could not survive the psychological wounds that combat inflicted. He spent 26 years after the war struggling with PTSD, insomnia, nightmares, and survivor's guilt. He used his fame to advocate for better treatment for veterans suffering from similar conditions. And he died at age 45 in a plane crash, never having found peace from a war that ended in 1945 but never left him.